Imagine reaching the age of 70, looking back on a lifetime of connections, conversations, and obligations, and realizing something startling. The people you thought you needed the most were the very ones draining your joy. What if I told you that avoiding my neighbors entirely was the unexpected key to unlocking a happiness I didn't know I was missing? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share might just change the way you think about relationships, boundaries, and the pursuit of true peace. Turning 70 is a milestone, a point in life where most people expect tranquility, reflection, and a certain level of contentment. For me, it came with a surprising revelation. Avoiding my neighbors completely transformed my happiness. This might sound odd or even antisocial, but hear me out. Over time, I discovered that creating boundaries and focusing on myself unlocked a new chapter of peace, fulfillment, and joy. The burden of social obligations. For much of my life, I was a people pleaser. I grew up in a community where knowing your neighbors and being involved in their lives was not just encouraged but expected. I attended every barbecue, block party, and neighborhood meeting. I babysat their kids, lent tools, and was the first to bake cookies when someone new moved in. It felt good to be needed, but as the years passed, I started to notice a shift. The casual interactions that once brought me joy began to feel like obligations. Small talk at the mailbox turned into lengthy conversations I didn't have the energy for. Requests for favors became more frequent and often one-sided. There was an unspoken expectation that I would always be available, and saying no started to feel like an act of rebellion. As I neared my 70s, I realized that these social obligations were draining me. I was constantly trying to meet others' expectations, leaving little time for myself. It was time for a change. The decision to step back. The turning point came during a particularly stressful week. A neighbor knocked on my door late one evening, asking for help with a last-minute errand. I was already exhausted from a full day of activities, but I agreed, as usual. When I returned home, I felt a wave of resentment and exhaustion. I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I decided to experiment. For 1 month, I limited my interactions with neighbors to the bare minimum. I stopped initiating conversations, declined invitations, and avoided places where I knew I'd run into them. At first, I felt guilty. I worried I was being rude or selfish. But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected happened. I started to feel lighter. The benefits of solitude. 1. Rediscovering myself. With fewer social distractions, I finally had time to reconnect with myself. I picked up old hobbies I had long abandoned, like painting and gardening. I spent mornings journaling and evenings reading books I'd always meant to but never had the time for. These activities were not only fulfilling but also reminded me of who I was outside of my role in the neighborhood. 2. Improved mental health. The constant interactions and obligations had taken a toll on my mental health. By stepping back, I noticed a significant reduction in stress and anxiety. I no longer worried about how I was perceived or whether I was meeting everyone's expectations. The quietness of my days became a source of comfort. 3. Deeper connections with loved ones. Interestingly, by withdrawing from my neighbors, I found I had more energy to invest in relationships that truly mattered. I spent more time with my family and close friends, deepening those connections in ways that felt genuine and meaningful. 4. Greater control over my time. One of the most liberating aspects of avoiding neighbors was reclaiming control over my schedule. I was no longer at the mercy of unplanned drop-ins or last-minute favors. My time became my own, and I used it to prioritize what truly brought me joy. Addressing the stigma. One of the biggest challenges was overcoming the stigma of being labeled antisocial. In our society, there's a strong emphasis on community and social interaction. Choosing to step back can be seen as unusual or even selfish. However, I came to realize that prioritizing my well-being wasn't something I needed to justify. I also learned that being a good neighbor doesn't mean sacrificing your happiness. It's possible to be respectful and kind without overextending yourself. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you a healthier one. Practical tips for setting boundaries. If you're considering a similar path, here are some practical tips I've learned along the way. 1. Be honest but polite. If a neighbor asks why you're less involved, be honest but tactful. You can say something like, "I've been focusing on personal projects lately and trying to spend more time with family." 2. Use physical cues. Simple actions like keeping your curtains closed or wearing headphones can signal that you're not available for a chat without needing to say it outright. 3. Limit accessibility. Avoid giving out personal information like your phone number or email unless it's absolutely necessary. This reduces the likelihood of being contacted for non-essential matters. 4. Create a sanctuary at home. Make your home a place of peace and comfort. Invest in creating a space where you can recharge and feel at ease. 5. Learn to say no. Saying no is a skill, and it's one worth mastering. Practice polite but firm ways to decline requests, like, "I'm sorry, I can't help with that right now." The unexpected joy of independence. What surprised me most about this journey was the joy I found in independence. I no longer felt obligated to conform to social norms or meet others' expectations. I was free to live life on my terms, and that freedom was exhilarating. I also discovered that solitude doesn't mean loneliness. In fact, I felt more connected to myself and my passions than I ever had before. By stepping away from my neighbors, I stepped closer to a life of authenticity and contentment. A new perspective on aging. Reaching 70 is often associated with slowing down and settling into routines. But for me, it marked the beginning of a new chapter. I've learned that happiness isn't about how many people you interact with or how involved you are in your community. It's about aligning your life with your values and needs. Avoiding my neighbors didn't make me antisocial, it made me intentional. It allowed me to focus on what truly mattered and let go of what didn't. And in doing so, I found a happiness that I never thought possible. The ripple effects of choosing solitude. As I continued to limit my interactions with neighbors, I noticed changes beyond my personal life. My home began to feel like a sanctuary, a place of true refuge. Previously, my doorbell ringing or a knock on the door had caused a jolt of stress, knowing I'd have to engage in conversations or handle unexpected requests. Now, my home was quiet, peaceful, and truly mine. This shift also gave me a new appreciation for time. Every moment felt more meaningful when it wasn't interrupted by obligations that didn't align with my values. I realized that for much of my life, I'd been living for others, rarely pausing to ask myself what I wanted. This newfound clarity helped me appreciate the luxury of time and the beauty of intentionally choosing how to spend it. The power of mindful living. Another surprising outcome of avoiding neighbors was how it made me more mindful. I became attuned to the simple pleasures of life, listening to birds in the morning, watching the sun set, or enjoying a cup of tea without distractions. These moments, though small, brought me immense joy and reminded me of the richness of life. Living more intentionally also allowed me to evaluate other areas of my life that needed adjustment. I began decluttering my home, donating items I no longer needed, and simplifying my daily routines. This physical and mental decluttering mirrored the emotional boundaries I was setting, leaving me with a sense of lightness and freedom. Rekindling creativity. As I embraced solitude, my creativity flourished. I returned to painting, something I hadn't done in decades. With no external pressures or distractions, I could lose myself in the process, experimenting with colors and techniques. The act of creating became a form of meditation, a way to express myself without words. Writing also became a cherished activity. I started journaling regularly, pouring my thoughts and reflections onto the pages. Over time, these entries became a chronicle of my journey, a testament to the transformative power of stepping back and focusing inward. Redefining relationships. Interestingly, withdrawing from neighbors didn't mean withdrawing from all social connections. Instead, it allowed me to prioritize deeper, more meaningful relationships. I called old friends I hadn't spoken to in years and reconnected with family members. These interactions felt more authentic and fulfilling because they were based on mutual care and respect, not obligation. I also became more discerning about who I let into my life. I realized that not everyone needs to have access to my time and energy. By setting boundaries, I was able to nurture relationships that truly enriched my life while letting go of those that didn't. A shift in perspective. Over time, I began to view my decision not as avoiding neighbors but as reclaiming my personal space. This subtle shift in perspective was empowering. It wasn't about running away from others, it was about running toward myself. I was no longer living in reaction to others' needs or expectations. Instead, I was creating a life that felt aligned with my values and desires. This shift also helped me see my neighbors in a different light. While I no longer engaged with them frequently, I no longer harbored resentment or frustration toward them. Instead, I wished them well from a distance and focused on maintaining a respectful, if distant, coexistence. Finding balance. Avoiding neighbors doesn't mean cutting off all contact or becoming a recluse. For me, it was about finding balance, choosing when and how to engage with others. I still exchanged pleasantries when I saw someone while out walking or waved hello from my window. These small gestures were enough to maintain a sense of connection without compromising my boundaries. This balance allowed me to enjoy the best of both worlds, the peace of solitude and the occasional warmth of human interaction. By defining my limits, I could engage on my terms, ensuring that every interaction felt intentional and positive. Overcoming loneliness. One of the biggest fears people have about avoiding neighbors is the risk of loneliness. But for me, solitude and loneliness are not the same. Solitude is a choice, a deliberate act of prioritizing one's inner world. Loneliness, on the other hand, stems from a lack of connection. By cultivating meaningful relationships and focusing on self-discovery, I found that solitude was anything but lonely. In fact, it was during these quiet moments that I felt most connected, to myself, to nature, and to the world around me. Lessons learned. This journey taught me invaluable lessons about boundaries, self-care, and the importance of living authentically. I learned that it's okay to put yourself first, even if it goes against societal norms. I discovered that happiness doesn't come from external validation but from within. I also realized that life is too short to spend it trying to please everyone. By saying no to others, I was saying yes to myself, and that was the greatest gift I could give. Advice for others. If you're considering a similar path, my advice is simple: start small. You don't need to make drastic changes overnight. Begin by setting one boundary, such as declining a request or limiting your availability. Gradually build from there, and listen to how your body and mind respond. Also, remember that it's okay to feel guilty at first. Breaking free from social expectations is challenging, especially if you're used to prioritizing others. But over time, you'll find that the benefits far outweigh the initial discomfort. Embracing the future. Now, at 70, I feel more at peace than ever before. My days are filled with joy, creativity, and a sense of purpose. I no longer feel burdened by obligations or weighed down by the expectations of others. Instead, I feel light, free, and deeply content. As I look toward the future, I'm excited about what lies ahead. I know that I have the tools to create a life that aligns with my values, and I'm committed to continuing this journey of self-discovery. The importance of boundaries. Ultimately, this experience has reinforced the importance of boundaries. They are not walls meant to shut others out but bridges that lead to a healthier, happier you. By setting boundaries, you're not only protecting your well-being but also creating space for growth and self-expression. A life well lived. At 70, I can confidently say that avoiding neighbors was one of the best decisions I've ever made. It wasn't about rejecting others but about embracing myself. And in doing so, I found a happiness that I never thought possible. This isn't a path for everyone, but for those who feel drained by constant interaction, it's worth exploring. You might just find, as I did, that stepping back can lead to a life of greater peace, joy, and fulfillment.